So we're talking about Robert Creeley's very famous, much anthologized poem, I Know a Man. And usually Creeley's associated with the Black Mountain School of poetry, but Creeley was someone who really helped form the community, or as he put it, the company of new American poets, crossing communities. And in this poem, he seems to have some kind of relationship with the beat poetry, and we just needed to do Creeley in this course, so we have Creeley. It doesn't quite perfectly fit. For instance, the lines are not long, for one thing. Okay, so we have this poem. What's happening? Is he unlike a lot of Creeley poems, he's telling about something. There's a scene here. Molly, where are we?
I'm not sure where we are, but he's talking about a conversation that he had with a friend.
Mm-hmm. Well, we do know where he is.
Well, I guess we're in a car.
They're in a car, yeah. They're driving somewhere. Okay, Emily, why do you like this poem so much?
Maybe the laughter in that sort of Harvard reading is a little pretentious, but it is...
Oh, you're referring to one of the many recordings we have on Penn Sound of Creeley reading this poem, and one of them is at Harvard.
Yes, I am.
And the Harvard audience laughs at the end. Why do you think they laugh?
Well, because there's something of a punchline. Is this person, the way I read it is he's going on this sort of existential, philosophical jag behind the wheel, this speaker of the poem.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it's this sort of...
Who's he talking to?
A man he either knows or doesn't know. Someone he thinks he knows but doesn't know that well.
So who's driving?
The speaker of the poem.
The speaker. So presumably John is in the passenger seat.
Yeah.
Or
John,
as it were. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And what's the punchline?
The punchline is he's wondering, what do we do in the darkness? What do we deploy against the sort of uncertainty and sadness? And he's sort of already deployed it, isn't he? He has the car. He's in the car. He's driving. And sort of by asking those questions, he incapacitates himself from actually finding answers.
Oh, you went big right away. Why do you think they laughed?
Because we all sort of know someone like this, right? It's who asks these questions but doesn't attend to someone who has all the philosophical parts but none of the practical parts. Mm-hmm. Or he does, but he forgets about it, and he has to drive the car rather than just talk about the car.
So John, or whoever this other person is reminding him of what?
That he's alive, that he's a body, that he exists in the world rather than just in his mind.
Okay. Amaris, your thought on this?
I like the emotional intensity of it and the uncertainty that Emily was talking about. And I liked also the way each of the ends of the line seems to turn, so that you have to, especially like because I am, and then I am always talking seems sort of a qualifier for that mode of being.
So Creeley not only situates this on the page that demands your attention in a William Carlos Williams sort of way, but he also performs it with a great break, even if the grammar suggests enjambment. Yeah? And so let's take an example. As I said to my friend, because I am always talking, what do the breaks suggest?
Well, there isn't a relationship of ownership here. There's an exchange going on between he and his friend, and the relation is perhaps defined by that talking, by that exchange of expression.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Talking, I mean, one of the ways in which this does fit in the conversation we're having about beat poetry is the talking, the always talking, the yakety-yakketing of Ginsberg and his friends crossing, particularly in the situation where they're crossing the country back and forth. Not going anywhere, but going somewhere fast. Does that have anything relation to what Creeley is saying, or maybe even satirizing in this poem? Max, any idea about that? I'm always talking.
It reminded me a little bit of the Sid Corman poem that we read earlier, in that he's just filling in this space. Maybe even that's the darkness that surrounds them. It's not about buying a car. That's not the way that you sort of fight that back, but rather you fill in that space.
But of course, in the Corman poem, he needs us.
He needs us.
I'm not so sure it's clear. He needs John.
He might not even need John. He doesn't even know his name.
He doesn't even know his name. Molly, what's the relationship between the speaker and this other person? And is this other person maybe a stand-in for us? I don't know.
I mean, the other person is there, and is there to listen, it seems, but is not necessarily like on the same page as the speaker. And the other person maybe is a little more grounded. He's the one that. This is why I think it is satirized at the end, where the other person has to say, "Look out where you're going."
Satirizing what? What position or what personality is being satirized?
Satirizing that incessantly talking that
The chattering monkey beat,
Right.
on speed, talking existential talk. Oh,
Maybe
not
we'll
so
put it
sure.
differently?
Yeah, go ahead, Emily.
So we talked about Kerouac and how sort of the mantra, the doctrine of these people is to just go without hesitation. And so he's talking about it, and it seems like that sort of, that command, just drive, look out where you're going, is telling him to do and go rather than just talk about doing.
Okay, so that's the beat position?
Wouldn't it be? Yeah.
And so what's the speaker's position?
Does he know his position yet? Can we say that with...
Well, he asked the question, what can we do against it? There seem to be two options. Dave, Poplar, what are some of the options about what we can do against it?
I don't think that is posed because there's an answer. I think that the poem is saying the beat generation tries to make themselves receptive to everything by going so fast. They're getting images quick here and there, and he's so confused by it all. He wants to buy a big car, even though he's reminded he's in a car, and he's basically, in the end, saying, look out where you're going. You're not seeing everything.
Who's saying that?
Well, John is saying that, but
The
John
passenger.
is such a common name, too. John might be a stand-in for the whole populace that Kerouac was talking
Okay, so
to.
we really do have some options here. What can we do against it? Or else shall we? All right, first of all, what can we do against it before we consider whether we should do against it? What can we do against it? What are the options in this poem?
It seems like the options to me are either talk or drive.
Talk or drive, right. And can we abstract? Talk or drive, or what or what?
Think or do?
Think or do. Which of the two does the poem as a poem ally itself with? With which of the two does the poem ally itself?
I think speaking, but in this very concentrated sense, right? Driving provides a space of enclosure and containment for these two passengers, and it kind of forces them to converge on their differences.
How else does it align itself with speaking?
It's words.
It's words, it's a poem.
Very in control.
To what extent does it ally itself with driving? I love this. Nobody knows what.
He's kind of, throughout the entire, you realize in the last stanza when you have the voice of the passenger kind of say, yo, like, look out.
Reality, man. We're in a car.
You kind of, driving is such a secondhand action, or it's something that's so easy to kind of just do without thinking. It's like you can go on auto
I
driver.
suppose, okay.
And so it seems as if he's just kind of on this auto drive mode, and he has to have someone kind of like pull him out of it and be like.
So the writing of the poem in an auto drive mode suggests it is more Kerouacian than.
But I don't. I
Creeley-esque.
could mean that, but
Yeah.
I also.
But I want to ask another question, which is, what other way is it possible for us to say that this poem aligns itself with driving as an answer to what we can do against the darkness? We've said, I think, eloquently how the poem aligns itself with talking as an option, but to what extent does it align itself with driving?
Well, I think like in driving, there's a certain road that is provided, and everyone has to follow the lanes and the rules and the lines of that. But here, he provides swerves with his line breaks.
Yeah, he sure does. This is, how do you characterize the flow of this speech?
Characterize it.
Yeah, how do you describe it? It's halting. It's in the way that Creeley famously performs it. It's vulnerable. It's anxious.
Whereas a lot of poets tend, when they have line breaks but no punctuation at the end of the line breaks, a lot of times they'll flow. Like if I had never heard Creeley read this, I might say, as I said to my friend, because I'm always talking.
Right.
John,
And in fact, William Carlos Williams famously wrote this way, but read as if he didn't do the lineation. Creeley is very conscious about, it's part of his affiliation with projective verse, which we're not going to go into, but it's very important to him to seek a form of the poem that does what it needs to do for the moment. I guess I'm going to answer my own question. This is the first time, I think, in our knowing each other. I really think it goes back to Clark Coolidge's quoting Blanchot on movement in writing. I think this poem is driving. This poem is driving. It's following its digressive thought. As I said to my friend, because I'm always talking, he hasn't told us what he said to his friend before he tells us because he's always talking. And he starts over John, I said, but that wasn't his name, which was not his name. Every step forward leads to a digression in some other way. He's clearly not driving forward. The poem is doing that kind of writing and movement thing that we were seeing in Kerouac. And that is a way in which this kind of writing, let's call it New American poetry, or let's just call it beat poetry for the minute, can be something we can do against the darkness of the current life, of American life, of how we feel.
Or even against talking. I mean, if this poem was really talking, then it would be something a little bit more like Kerouac, where it would be just like free associations and just like talking and talking and talking.
But I think I'm saying that I think it is a lot like that. It just doesn't look that way. But the other question is, so I've been asking what can we do against it, and whether, which talking or driving is something we can do against it, the darkness. But then he says, or else shall we? Or else shall we? Or else shall we do something against it? What's that option mean? Shall we even bother to do something against it? Shall we drive into the darkness? Shall we accept the existential crisis? And why not do what? Why not what?
Either.
Yes, I know what it said. I know the poem says buy a goddamn big car, but what does that mean, Amaris?
I think it starts out with this very simple you and I exchange going on, but here it starts with a we that's going on, and an emphasis on looking out and looking at where you can go together once you've arrived at maybe some commonality.
Anybody else want to talk about the goddamn big car? Why not buy a goddamn big car? What's he talking about now?
This seems to the goddamn big car seems to be this sort of bourgeois suburban aspiration to start your family. You get your big car, you get your house, and so why not just sell out?
Or
I guess is what it's
in other words, maybe we should, maybe the
Kerouac
way,
driving across.
or it's a jalopy. It's a goddamn big
Or
car
it's like
that we paid $26.
I feel like that's what he's already driving right now.
Yeah, maybe.
He's talking about.
Maybe. I tend to agree with you. Nobody's really concluded this for sure about this poem, which is much talked about. Buy a goddamn car. One of the things we can do against the darkness is to sell out, I think is what you're saying. And then it's at that point that the passenger, who's essentially a cipher, just a passenger, says, you're in this car now. We are here now, as Emily was saying. And you probably ought to drive it, or the existential crisis is going to get a lot worse. Emily, final word? Maybe you just want to repeat what you said at the beginning.
I think you said it well. It's just touching. It brings him from this place of abstraction to this plate of sort of concrete physical existence. And rather than that being confining or scary or dark, it becomes some type of solace. It answers the sort of scary question that he asks himself.
Good. I'm going to give Molly a final word. Why do you like this poem so much?
Ooh.
What's it do for you?
I like it because it incorporates that urge to talk and to drive and to go, but it also comes back to reality at the end.
And you like the reality, coming back to reality at the end? You're not really ready to hit the road?
I'm not sure where I am, but I like
Okay.
to know that it's there.
Well, in another session, we'll talk about where you are. For now, I think we've done a good job on I Know a Man.